Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Transformation podcasts. We're going to dive into a question that most leaders still underestimate, and that is the power of empathy. I want to start with a quote from today's guest, Melissa Robinson-Winemiller. When you encounter an immovable object, you try and go round it. It's the same in leadership. Hold that thought. I'm joined today by Melissa Robinson-Winemiller, coach, consultant, and author of The Empathic Leader, a book that's looking to give leaders a playbook to make empathy actionable. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Susie. I'm so excited to be here.
It's a pleasure, and it's lovely to have you on the show. Melissa, I know you research empathy and you work with leaders to help them operationalize empathy, both for themselves and also for their teams. And and I love this analogy that I'm going to steal from your book about the Stradivarius violin, not just because I'm a cellist, but because Stradivarius instruments are beautiful. But you make that analogy that the beautiful, brilliant instruments he makes um, are brilliant, but you can't get the true value unless you know how to play them and you know how to make the strings sing. So on that note, I want to start on that note, no pun intended, but I would love us to explore how empathy can drive innovation, how you can scale it across teams and cultures, and why some of the most successful organizations are now putting empathy at the center of their operating model. So if I go back to that quote from your book, Melissa, around when you encounter an immovable object, you try and go around it. What exactly did you mean by that? And what inspired you to actually write The Empathic Leader?
And that's a fantastic question, honestly, because I see it happening all the time, is when you
Yeah.
have leaders who, because they don't, so let's start with the definition of empathy, because that's the first thing is people don't understand what it actually is.
Mm,
And what it is isn't necessarily about feeling. It's about understanding and connection through perspective taking. So if you have leaders who don't know how to use this because they think it's one of those things that just magically happens, not that it's a skill you can learn
mm,
and build and
mm.
teach, they're not connected with their people. They don't understand their people. And because of that, their people will usually run into roadblocks and deaf ears because of these leaders. So
Mm.
instead of them all working on the same vision, being in the same direction, you end up with a lot of people having to go around the people who are supposed to be helping them in order to even just get their job done. It's
Yeah,
kind of crazy.
it is crazy. And I love that because it comes to bust this myth, which is still very present of the strong leader in inverted commas,
Yeah.
i.e., he or she doesn't show vulnerability and just moves forward. And one of the points I really liked from your book is when you say, if leaders are unable to create actionable empathy for themselves, then how can we expect them to effectively use it to lead others? And I wanted to start there because how can we create actionable empathy, therefore connecting with other people?
Well, you just hit the target right in the middle
Oh,
because
thank you.
that's really, I mean, that's really what it's about, right? Is being
Mm,
able, not just having empathy, but using empathy to be able to increase profit, productivity, and innovation and really better everybody's lives in the process.
mm, mm.
I mean, that's really the point. And one of the things that I'm very strong on is that if you can't have empathy for yourself first, how can you possibly be expected to have it for anybody else?
Mm, mm,
Because you'll get these leaders, like you said, these strong leaders, tough leaders.
mm,
I'm helming the ship, but they're the same ones that not only are having trouble at work, their families are falling apart, their finances are falling apart. They may have addiction problems. They're very driven. They might be dealing with all sorts of imposter syndrome things because they know deep down that they're not being the leader that they could be. And without having the self empathy to be able to connect to self compassion
mm,
and say, I am a leader, but I'm also a human being. And for good or bad, I'm a human being first, which means empathy. They're
mm,
never going to be able to use it actionably for anybody else.
mm.
Not
But
not really effectively.
no, and we'll come back to that in a little bit, but I think it's really interesting that they are living out what society's stereotypes and what they've been formatted, is the word I like to use, to do, which is
Yeah.
not to take vulnerability and empathy to the workplace. And they misread empathy as indulgence or weakness. And how can they reframe it, Melissa, as strategic awareness, which is essentially what it is.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, it's anything but weak
Yeah,
because you've got to have courage to use it, you
totally.
know,
Mm,
because if the whole point is perspective taking and you're understanding the perspective of another person, you already know what you're walking into. And that could be 100 million things. So you've not only have to have the courage to be able to take on hard emotions, but
mm,
you have to have the courage to be able to say, despite these hard emotions, I still need to be able to use my cognitive empathy. I understand what you're feeling, I just don't feel it, and make the best possible decisions.
mm,
Having empathy doesn't mean you're not making hard decisions.
mm,
Doesn't mean you're not doing the best thing for the organization. It just means
mm.
that you're taking the correct perspective so that you can lead in the most effective and most efficient fashion.
And if I go back to cognitive empathy, that's one of those things that you can take off and say, I'm being empathetic intellectually. I understand that I need to be empathetic and I sort of understand your situation. Tick. Um, so,
Yeah.
how can we guard against that? It reminds me of one of the case studies in your book about a CEO called Bob and the gap between the culture he thought he was creating
Yeah.
and the massive disconnect with the lived experience of the people in his company, but he didn't see that. Can you walk us through that and
Yeah.
give your advice on how he could have guarded against that?
So in the case of Bob in the book, he completely lacked self-awareness, which is so when I'm teaching self-empathy, because that's where I start with my people. It's like you've got to start with the self. There's 4 steps. And it's self-observation. And I can
Hmm.
go into this deeper if you want or not. It's up to you. But there's self-observation, which leads to self-reflection, being able to turn the lens in and say,
Mm.
look, this is what this is about, which then leads to self-awareness, which is understanding your impact on the world. What are you doing and how is that impacting those around you for good or bad? Which then leads to self-compassion. And those 4 steps will get you to self-empathy. So if you have a leader who hasn't
Mm.
done any of those steps and just employs cognitive empathy, just okay, thought about it, check, done, then they're not actually going through the steps to be able to employ self-empathy first.
Mm.
They're just jumping straight to cognitive empathy. And the scary thing about that is cognitive empathy is the one that can be learned. So if we're talking about dark triad, which
Yeah.
is psychopaths and sociopaths and Machiavellians and narcissists, they learn cognitive empathy and they actually turn it into what's called dark empathy because they use it for manipulation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is a double-edged sword in that it's not enough to just be able to go, oh yeah, I get it, done,
Mm.
because that can be used for manipulation and that's
Mm.
not always good. The point
No.
is to be able to employ the self-empathy first so you really understand and then be able to add both cognitive and emotional empathy where needed.
Mm. And can I come back to that first quote that I gave around if leaders are unable to create actionable empathy for themselves, i.e., self-empathy,
Mhm.
then how can we expect them to use it to lead others? How do you make that actionable, Melissa?
So
Self-empathy.
yeah. So that's going back to those 4 steps. So
Hmm.
beginning with the self-observe, because before you can make it actionable, you have to understand it. You have to know where it fits into your life. You have to see where the gaps are. So you really start with self-observation, being able to take a step back and look at your own actions and do it in a way that you're not assigning emotion. It's what I call
Okay.
critical not caring.
Mm.
Because when you start assigning emotion, that's when you get judgment involved. And
Mm.
judgment and empathy can't exist in the same space.
Mm.
So it begins there. Then you take that observation and you reflect. You move into the self reflection realm. And that's actually trying to connect it together. Okay, these were my actions. Why did I react that way? Why
Okay.
did this person trigger me? Why did I fly off in that board meeting? You
Mm.
know? So you're turning the lens inward and trying to understand the
Mm.
self.
And are you
Then the
looking for
lens goes
triggers? Sorry, triggers or patterns or both?
both,
Okay.
both. What I'll usually suggest is that we look at impact versus intent.
Okay.
What was your intent? I
Mm.
mean, I mean, were you intending well? Because that's the first step. And what was the actual impact?
Mm. Mm.
So yeah, and definitely patterns because we're dealing with human behavior. So you're always looking for patterns,
Mm.
trying to figure out because there's almost always a trail where this happens over and over and over again,
Mm.
you
Mm.
know? So self-reflection, which then you're looking at self-awareness, which means turning that lens outward and saying, okay, this is what I did. This is the pattern. This is the behavior. This is why I'm doing it. How is that affecting the world around me? When I blew up in that meeting, did people suddenly do what I wanted them to do, or were they all just scared of me and they avoided me and went around me? You know,
Yeah.
what was the actual impact? What did actually happen?
Mm,
Then at that point, you can move to self-compassion. So empathy actually doesn't have any action in and of itself. It's understanding, it's perspective taking, it's connection. The action part of it is compassion.
mm,
Empathy is what you understand, connection is what you do. So through self compassion, now we have actionable empathy.
mm. And if you work in a culture or an environment that has low empathy,
Mm-hmm.
um, hypervigilance is a real issue, isn't it? What I call hypervigilance, that's constantly being on, a little bit paranoid, never really, almost gaslighting, but being gaslit at the same time. So, feeling like people making you feel like you're wrong, not sure whether you're right, not sure whether that's what's actually happening, although that's what you think is happening. You describe this in your own lived experience when you were constantly on high alert. What did you learn from that period? And what would your advice to leaders be to manage this, Melissa? Because I see so much of it in organizations and I see people suffer in silence. I see them
Yeah,
question themselves in silence. I see them doubt themselves. And sometimes I think a conversation that takes them to a different perspective would maybe help them.
absolutely. Because there it is, perspective. You're understanding the perspective of the other and saying, what I'm doing is borderline gaslighting. They're saying, this is my lived experience. And I'm saying, no, it's not. It's this because I said
Mm,
it is. We're going to do it this way because this is how we have always done it and we're not
mm,
changing it.
mm,
Even though the results say this is not the best way to go, I'm going to tell them it is. These are exactly what you're talking about. They're missing that perspective piece. And because of that, their leadership isn't as strong. Your people don't trust you when they feel like it's all the emperor's new clothes,
mm,
you know?
mm. Yeah, and if we look at sort of now we have a lot of data, of course. So if we look at the data and the neuroscience, and you say data has the illusion of impartiality, okay, but
Yeah.
behind those numbers are humans. I love that phrase because, we can easily get data today for our decision making, but what we do with it is a whole different, and what we make it mean is often a whole different scenario. So how can empathy impact decision making and trust, and therefore innovation, but particularly decision making, because that's what we're pressed to do the most in organizations is make decisions, quality decisions quickly, timely, deploy them short term, and then go back to the decision making drawing board. So, I think
Yeah.
empathy has a lot to offer there, but then it's not just self-empathy, is it?
No, no, because in that case, you're looking out for the larger organization.
Mm,
And I mean, hard decisions have to be made. Things have to be done. Businesses exist to make money. And if
yeah.
they don't make money, they don't last very long.
Mm,
So,
mm,
when you're looking at it through that lens, I would actually argue that a person who can run a business well and efficiently and actually make that money is going to have the most empathy because they understand the perspectives to be able to make this organism work. It's an organization, it's an
mm,
organism. We want it to be able to grow and evolve and do better and better. So the thing is if you've already got this in place where you've got an empathic culture,
mm,
right? You're already going to be in touch with what's going on. If you look at it as, well, I've never done this before, I'm going to have to go figure out what everybody's thinking. That's an overwhelming task.
mm,
But if it's something that's been in place all the way along, and it doesn't matter if we're talking empathy or value-based healthcare or, transformational leadership or
mm,
whatever,
mm,
if it's already in place, then you're able to make these quick decisions and these understanding decisions, that understand the culture of this organism without having to go and survey everybody. You're
mm,
already going to kind of have a temperature test.
mm,
So the key isn't to have it as something that I'm just going to do it once and then I'm finished. I'm going to send out all these employee surveys and riffle through them once and then forget about it.
mm,
The point is that this is a culture. This is a practice, not a performance,
mm,
right? Because
mm,
practice is something you do every single day, and that's what you do. This is part of the culture.
mm. And this is why empathy is a hard skill, not a soft skill, because it's
Yes.
a practice, isn't it? And you can't
Yep.
just go on a training course for 2 days or read a couple of books and then it just happens. And I think,
Right.
I want to touch on middle management. You dedicate a whole part to it in your book. And I think
Yeah.
middle management are often coined as the people who won't let things happen, the naysayers, the blockers in transformational processes. But, why is empathy particularly important for them?
Because they have the opportunity to actually lead both up and down.
Hmm.
They're going to be the people that are going to touch the most people. And so having that temperature check, not only for their direct reports, but for the people that they report to, is invaluable for those positions.
Hmm.
And those are the people that are someday going to be in the C-suite. So why not start practicing these skills now?
Hmm. And if I come back to those two things, one, practicing, which takes discipline, takes
Yes.
energy, okay?
Yep.
Practicing and also being in the middle of the sandwich, so to speak. So
Right.
they're managing up, which is an art, and they're managing down, which is an art in communication and leadership. So how can they keep their energy cup full, Melissa? Because if they're working with an organization that doesn't necessarily have empathy at all levels, then not
Yeah.
only are they going to be resourcing their teams and using their energy for empathy, they're also going to be looking for other energy to do relational leadership.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, there is such a thing as empathy fatigue. We
Yes,
saw
tell
it
me
during the
more about
pandemic.
that.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
No, you can, I mean, you're right. The cup only has so much. And
Mm,
we find it in healthcare a lot that people use, especially emotional empathy, so much that they finally are just like, I can't, I'm done, I'm burnt out.
mm,
And that's a thing. You have to,
mm,
especially in leadership. That's why part of the reason why we can have such high burnout numbers for,
mm.
leaders.
And what?
But
Sorry,
oh, go no,
no,
go
no.
ahead.
I was going to just come off the back of that with the idea of what are the red flags for
Oh,
when empathy becomes too much, when it risks clouding judgment or slowing decisive action. But if I take something I really liked from your book, what are the red flags and what are the beige flags? So I'll let you explain the difference in the color, but I really like that system of anticipation and hopefully prevention, but you'll tell us.
yeah. Yeah. So it actually comes from the dating world, which is kind of
Which made
ironic
me laugh
because
even more.
yeah, but it's all relationships, right?
Yeah,
Where it's all people relating to people.
yeah.
So a beige flag is one where you're like, oh, that's a warning sign, but it might clear itself up and I'm willing to live with it
Mm,
because, people are people and it's not a perfect world. A
mm,
red flag means just run.
mm,
Just don't even set your bag down. Just
mm,
go. Because there's some of that as
mm,
well. We have to be very careful of that.
mm,
So if we're talking about like empathy fatigue, you would definitely want to pay attention to the beige flags before they became red flags.
mm,
You know, someone
mm.
who just obviously does not want to think about it, does not want to engage. It's their way or no way. And usually by the time you reach a point of empathy fatigue, you're reaching burnout as a whole. So
Mm,
the same symptoms that you would see in burnout for leaders,
mm,
where they start making bad decisions, where they're not necessarily thinking of the organization as a whole, they're just trying to rapid fire things. Again, usually we end up with some kind of substance abuse or family problems, or you can see this leaking out. It doesn't stay at work.
mm,
Those are
mm,
all red flags. So if you're feeling the beige flags, I'm becoming tired. I don't want to connect with people. Empathy does take more energy. There's
mm,
studies on that.
mm,
Neurologically, it does take more.
mm.
So, that's the time when you need to take a break. You need to step it back. You need to employ that self-empathy.
Yeah. And do you think, and is it something that you teach in first line leadership? Because I
Which,
haven't seen that in any leadership development programs in terms of trying to anticipate empathy fatigue, the idea of beige flags, red flags. Is that something you think should be taught right from first line management?
yes, absolutely, because we're burning out our leaders. We're taking our top talent and wringing it out. And part of what happens, even though I talk about empathy and leadership, and I'm like, hey, leaders, you need to pay attention to this.
Mm,
When you have outside things contributing to it, like empathy fatigue, it's it's harder for them to be able to employ it.
mm,
So yeah, that's something I put in right away because I think it's that important.
mm. And if I come back to, I'd just like to move it over to scaling because that's everybody's big question. How do you scale empathy? That's a
Yeah.
large debate, isn't it? But, if I look at sort of self-empathy and therefore empathy for others, if I look at sort of situational sensitivity and compassion as systemic compassion, so within the culture,
Yeah.
how do you embed empathy in the culture without turning it into a poster on a wall, a tick box exercise? Because,
Yes.
all my listeners will recognize that because that's what happens in organizations and it comes from a good intention, to come back to your
Oh,
intention impact discussion. So, what would your advice be for scaling empathy within leadership?
it's really the same as just building culture,
Mm,
right? Because culture drips down from the top, always.
mm,
So, as a leader, if you're saying, well, our mission, vision, and values say we have empathy, but then you don't show it. For instance, I was working with a director. Well, no, not a director. She was like a CEO. She was top level. They have different titles.
mm,
Anyway, she had called she once a year they have three big cross-functional meetings, everybody has to show up.
mm,
And because it's healthcare, you have people that work overnight, you have
mm,
people that work at all odd hours. So she had planned one of these for like a Tuesday morning, Monday morning kind of thing at 7 a.m. Well, the night before, she canceled it and said, well, I want to be able to be there for my kid's first day of school, which on the surface is like, yeah, that's legitimate. But
mm,
she had never bothered to think about her people, that they wanted to be there for the first day of school, that they were coming off 12-hour shifts and sticking around to be there. She hadn't taken the perspective of what had happened, of what was happening with her people. So her culture said, I expect you to have empathy, but I'm not actually going to do it.
mm.
And that's a problem, because they're watching. If you're in a leadership position, you are on stage all the time and
Yeah.
someone is watching. And
Mm,
because she did that, I mean, the next round of employee engagement scores were terrible, which is when I got brought in.
yeah.
But she didn't even see it. She was completely unaware of how her actions had affected her people.
Mm. It's interesting because you can inspire people without knowing it, and you can also demotivate people without knowing it with the best intentions. Um,
Yes.
Melissa, can you give me some examples of how teams might operationalize empathy? What does it look like? How can they put it into the way we do things around here? How can they make it sustainable, I suppose is my question.
Yeah. So when you're working in teams and you're wanting to actually make this part of the culture, it's something that has to actually be discussed. It's
Mm,
not just something that people magically have. It's a skill, it's a tool. So as you're going through this, this is where I go back to the 4 steps to self-empathy to be
mm,
able to start there, and then moving into the impact versus intent side of things and
mm,
working this as a team. Well, we want our intent is to be able to create this medical record system so that everybody can use it. We're going about it in this way. What's our actual impact going to be? Well, what's the perspective? How are these people going to see it? How are these people going to view it? How is this change going to be integrated?
mm,
So that you're actually moving step by step. Our intent is X.
mm,
What's our impact going to be? Well, the only way we know is by reaching out and understanding what these people are thinking and feeling and how this is going to be integrated.
mm.
So now, this has become a step along the way for these teams to be able to bring empathy into whatever the project is, starting on a small scale and then bringing it up to a larger one. In a way, it kind of runs parallel to a lot of change management.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to say, if I'm a middle manager or a sort of change leader in an organization, and I'm going to, in my next workshop, do something to have this discussion and start this muscle building for empathy,
Yeah.
what would you suggest that they do?
So we actually start with some worksheets talking about impact versus intent.
Okay.
And we'll do a little bit of role playing. We'll do a little bit of, pair and share
Mm,
or whatever you want to call it, where, they actually discuss this is what happened.
mm,
This was my intent. This was the impact. And the funny thing is sometimes they're like, oh, the impact was great. The impact was fantastic. And the people around them will have to say, yeah, no, not so much. Perhaps we need to take a step back and work on the self-awareness piece.
mm,
That
mm.
actually happens a lot.
Which brings me to a very familiar scenario for me. I work a lot with startups that are scaling and small organizations that are growing. Do you
Mhm.
think empathy can survive hypergrowth?
Oh,
How
absolutely.
how can it survive hypergrowth? So if, how do you scale compassion when your organization triples in size in 18 months?
Again, it has to be part of the culture and
Hmm.
it has to come from the top. It can't just be, this is what I want you guys to do, but I'm not going to do it. And that's hard. I mean, if you have something exploding in that way, you're having a hard enough time just keeping a hold of what's happening, much less
Mm,
to be thinking about, now what do we do about adding empathy? It's
mm,
it's hard. And, being a leader is a very difficult position.
mm,
But if it's embedded from the very beginning and it's something that's important enough that you say, okay, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to keep it, even when things are stressful, even when things are hard, even when you're trying to figure out how to manage a growth spurt like that,
mm,
it still becomes part of the fabric of the organization.
mm.
So we used to teach leadership like management, right? There's a difference between management and leadership.
Yeah.
Management goes back to the Industrial Revolution and saying, this is a machine, people are cogs, we plug one in, we plug one out, it's inputs and outputs.
Mm,
That's management. When you think leadership, it actually says this organization is an organism. It's going to grow. It may even shrink a little bit. It's going
mm,
to have evolutionary phases. It's going to be doing all of this. But as a leader, I can't just plug cogs in and out and expect this to work optimally. And in fact, if I do that, eventually as a machine, it's just going to hit the end of whatever and fall apart because that's what
mm.
machines do.
Yeah.
Organisms continue to grow. And that's where it's important to actually take this leadership stance and say, if I want this organism to grow, I'm going to have to feed it.
Mm,
I'm going to have to take care of it.
mm,
And I'm going to have to make sure it's in a place that's optimal for its growth, or I will either slowly or quickly kill it.
mm.
And that's where the empathy comes in.
And how, therefore, well, what's your opinion on measuring empathy, Melissa? Because, in organizations, they want to measure everything, and I understand why. Um, but what do you think of putting empathy in personal behavioral objectives? How would you measure it? What type of KPIs are you putting on it or not?
I mean, from a micro level, of course, you're looking at employee engagement,
Mm,
you're looking at, how your customers and your other stakeholders are feeling. You're taking the temperature on a small level.
mm,
But on a macro level, it's actually been shown to increase profit, productivity, and innovation. So there was a study done, was a survey done by Ernst and Young in 2021, and they were looking at quiet quitting and the Great
mm,
Resignation and why
mm,
people were leaving, and specifically they looked at empathy. And what they found, and this is Ernst and Young, I mean, Big Four
mm,
global
mm,
consultancy, was that by leaders effectively employing empathy, it raised productivity by 87%, innovation by 86%, and profit by 84%. So you're going to see it in your bottom line because there won't be as much attrition,
mm,
because the vision is going to be something that people can actually clearly follow. You're going to be building loyalty, you're going to be building trust,
mm.
and it's going to be there. There may not be an arrow that says this is empathy, but you're going to see it in your bottom line.
Yeah. So you measure it across the strategic business objectives and
Yes.
how they're faring. And
Yes.
I can't not ask you this question. We're in the world of AI. What happens for you when AI and automation meet human empathy? What is the future of empathic leadership look like?
So the funny thing about AI is that it has no empathy. It can't.
Paradoxically,
It
yes.
Yeah, if empathy is to understand and connect through perspective taking, then scraping large amounts of data and compiling it and finding patterns is not perspective taking,
No.
which is why we're having all these lawsuits now
Mm,
with people going into psychosis and
mm,
AI driving people in a way that seems inhumane, but it doesn't understand. It's a machine. It doesn't get perspective taking. So the more people can double down on the human side of things and being able to understand human connection and empathy, the better they're going to be able to navigate this brave new world with all of the AI and the tech and all of those different things that are coming in. Because
mm,
for the foreseeable future, at least, AI is not going to have empathy. So we
No.
need people who can.
Mm. And what does that mean for the definition of high-performing teams, Melissa, for you?
Well, again, I mean, even if we're using AI, because it's a fantastic tool, it's an amazing
Mm.
tool.
Yeah.
It's completely changed the landscape of
Mm.
business as we know it.
Mm.
But the teams that can really get that empathy, I understand what my teams need because I've taken that perspective. I understand how we can actually include AI. And even though everybody is panicking because they think they're going to lose their job over this,
Mm.
I can actually bring people into the tent and create stronger, more cohesive teams to use AI as a tool and
Mm.
not as a combatant,
Mm. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the more we can actually train teams. I mean, we're back to it being skill based
Yeah.
to be able to use AI as, or AI, empathy. Listen to me, use empathy as a tool, the better they're going to be able to use that AI tool.
Mm. And the more we train people and each other in empathy,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
the more I have a vision of a workplace where compassion becomes the norm. I would love
Yes.
to hear your vision if I project us to 2030. And I know that's a hard question because we have no idea. I mean, the AI we're using today is probably not the AI we're going to be using in 3 months' time, even. So, which
Yeah.
is going to impact the workplace and the way we work. But what's
Yeah.
your future vision, Melissa, through all your research and what you see on a daily basis? You know, what are operations going to look like, do you think, for leaders in the future?
Because AI is going to be able to take over the menial day to day tasks and the stuff that maybe doesn't take as much bandwidth or vision
Mm.
or thought, they're going to be able to hand all that stuff over to AI eventually. We're not quite there yet either. I mean, AI
No,
isn't
no,
quite as
no.
you know.
Behind the
But
height. Yeah.
yes, exactly. I mean, it's still a machine and people haven't quite come to grips with some of it, but
Mm.
you can hand that stuff to people, which leaves our people free to be able to consider the vision. What do we ultimately want out of these organizations? What
Mm.
do we actually see as far as a bigger global perspective?
Mm.
Actual social responsibility within these organizations. Being able to really serve our customers to the best ability and not just keep rehashing the same old stuff.
Mm.
The ones who can actually get a hold of empathy and really learn how to use it are really going to be the superstars of the next generation. We're always looking around and going, well, who's going to be the next Steve Jobs or,
Mm. Mm.
the names that get floated around. But they're going to be the ones that are really going to be able to tap into human potential,
Mm.
which is a thing that AI is never going to have.
Mm. Mm. And I like that. I like that because it's comforting, but I also like that because it means that we're going to scale humanity as opposed to tech. So, I like that idea. Um,
Yeah.
Melissa, what is the most transformative thing that you came across in your research on empathy and its relation to the workplace?
The biggest thing that could cause the greatest amount of transformation the quickest was
Mm.
actually building that self-awareness muscle, and that has so much to do with feeding into self-empathy and then feeding into empathy for others. Because if you're just not aware
Mm.
of how your actions are affecting both yourself and everybody else, then your intent and your impact don't align and it just doesn't work.
Mm.
So being able to get, first of all, being aware that you may not be aware,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and then being able to learn how to actually build that muscle.
Mm.
This is how we do self-awareness. This is how we get better at it. This is how we practice it,
Mm.
and now this is how we apply it to be able to better our organization.
And if I have self-empathy and I am aware, probably less aware than I think I am, but still I have a certain level of awareness as a leader,
Yeah.
what would your advice be to the leaders listening if they're in that position and they're thinking, how can I increase my agency in this system to start driving some of the power of empathy that I know exists, but that I don't see being put into the systems around me?
The best thing to do is to be able to talk to people that you can trust that will give you the honest truth.
Mm.
which as a leader can be difficult because you
Mm.
don't want just people that are going to be like, yeah, yeah, you're great. You want people that are going to say, let's talk about this because maybe you could have handled it better, you
Mm.
know? And it doesn't
Mm.
matter if this is a mentor, it doesn't matter if it's a mastermind group, it doesn't matter if it's a coach, as long as it's a coach that's aligned with what you're trying to do,
Mm.
you know? But being able to have that input and get out of your own echo chamber to be able to say, yeah, I thought this was my impact, but this was actually my impact. Maybe I need to realign how I want to be able to infuse my intent into what we're doing.
Mm. And my final question is, if there are people listening to this who are in a team where the team has empathy, but the leader does not, and that
Oh,
they've
yeah.
tried to have that interaction with the leader, but they're just not seeing it or they don't want to see or hear it, what would your advice be?
Unfortunately, if it's bad enough that, you're dealing with an actual toxic situation,
Mm.
you just have to understand that the best you can do is, control what's basically at the end of your arms, that
Yeah.
you're creating, you know, I mean, seriously, with micromanagers, middle managers,
Mm.
people that are actually doing that, having to lead up and down,
Mm.
that happens a lot. And they're kind of just stuck with the situation. But if you can create that microcosm within your own sphere of influence and you can practice this, what you're actually doing is practicing a leadership skill that's going to make you someone that really is going to be able to take this into other organizations, into other teams. And as these teams grow and as these teams get better, I mean, ironically, what'll happen is the people at the top leadership that don't have it will see these teams that are just growing like wildfire and doing amazing things. And they're like, oh, I don't understand how that
Mm.
happens, but you guys are our star team, or whatever. And it always seems to come out in the end,
Mm.
whether you have to go somewhere where you're actually going to be able to grow this empathic culture,
Mm.
or people sometimes do kind of wake up and go, huh, that's amazing. How did you do it?
Nice. So they're
Yeah.
informally upskilling themselves and their teams. And to come right back to the beginning, they are finding ways round immovable objects.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Melissa, thank you so much. Thank you for coming and sharing your research and your experience and what's in your book. Where can people find out more about you, your book, and what you do?
Yeah. So my book, The Empathic Leader, is on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all the usuals. Or I also have a link on my website, which is EQVIA, and that's V as in Victor, IA, empathy.com. And I have a blog there. And my TEDx was just released about 3 weeks ago, and
Oh,
we're up to
congratulations.
40,000 views in 3 weeks.
Oh,
So you can find
wow.
me there too.
Okay, great. Well,
Yeah,
I'll put all those links in the show notes so that people can find you. And my takeaway is this is a practice. It's an architecture and it's a practice. And I would invite you all to go and read the playbook that I've just read, The Empathic Leader, and see what you can take from it and see what you can do with it. Melissa, thank you very much.
thank you so much for having me, Susie. This was amazing.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. Thank you.